Hi everyone, it's Katrina. Inventions of the Maya. The ancient Maya civilization was responsible for tons of impressive inventions. They built royal palaces, observatories peeking out through jungle canopies, and highways across Mexico. They even invented elastic and rubber, along with underground reservoirs to store water during droughts. But perhaps the most famous invention by far is the Mayan calendar. The Maya came up with the Hab calendar, which was even more accurate than our modern Gregorian calendar. They used their advanced knowledge of astronomy to determine that every year has approximately 365.2420 days. They weren't 100% accurate, but they were extremely close. The true approximation of a year on Earth is 365.2422 days. And yet, oddly enough, the Gregorian calendar that we use today is based on an estimation of 365.2425 days. The Maya were 0.0001 degrees closer. They were also obsessed with Venus, and somehow they figured out that it passes around the sun every 584 days. The Maya, despite being viewed as barbaric by the Europeans, had a more stable understanding of the cosmos than anyone in Europe. They invented a lot of other cool stuff too, like the filtration system to give the population clean water. They understood how to use volcanic minerals known as zeolites to filter fresh water. Their purification system was so effective that many of its aspects are still used in filters across the world today. The Maya were expertly filtering water in 164 BC, something the British didn't figure out until 1627 AD. The Maya also developed impressive tools for use in agriculture, elastic production, and chocolate manufacturing. But since they are long gone, who knows what other kinds of crazy things they built that we don't even know about? There could be epic Mayan machines still buried in the jungle that nobody's ever dreamed of. It's shout-out time! I want to give a big thank you to Ronnie Gillen and Joseph Spires for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries. For dinosaurs or advanced technology, we've got it all. Lost art of the Minoans. The Minoan civilization of ancient Greece prospered 3,500 years ago. They developed a specialized technology that disappeared with them and then wasn't seen again on this planet until about 70 years ago. Amazingly, the Minoans figured out how to create composite ship hulls using only natural materials. I'll give you the specifics of the construction in a second, but first I want to express just how unique of a skill this was. The ships being made by the Minoans were unlike anything created by any other civilization of their era. Then, when the Minoans vanished around 1500 BC, they took their knowledge with them. It wasn't passed on to cultures that came later, like the Phoenicians. The main construction of a boat hull during 1500 BC involved drilling and rebaiting wood planks so that rope could hold the planks together with wedges from inside the hull. This provided tension on the rope to pull the planks together. Gaps between planks were filled with a flax material or hemp fibers. People would also use pitch as a seal to prevent water from seeping through the hull. Pitch was a fabulously simple invention made by mixing pine resin with pulverized graphite from a dead fire. The method used by the Minoans to make their ships was very similar, but with a few key differences that changed the game. The Minoans used cypress planks connected with hexagonal shims to build their hulls. They would drill holes in the planks so that they could easily be joined by the shims, which were almost like an early version of steel fasteners. It didn't take any advanced technology to do, but it was a genius idea. The method worked by providing a much stronger joint. The Minoans also used linen cloth with pine resin for sealing the hull, a combination that worked as a natural polymer. The distinction between Minoan ships and those of other civilizations would have been truly remarkable. The Minoan approach yielded vessels that weren't only lighter, but also boasted superior hydrodynamics, resulting in increased speed. Yet these advantages weren't limited to weight and speed alone. Minoan ships also exhibited enhanced maneuverability, added structural strength, and the capability to undertake extended sea voyages. The monks of Sutra Isle. The Middle Ages weren't always as barbaric as fantasy movies would have you believe. In some ancient Scottish ruins, recent excavations revealed the exceptional medical abilities of some monks who lived nearly 1,000 years ago. The monks had developed painkillers, appetite suppressants, and even a reliable cure for hangovers. The ruins of Sutra Isle are in rough shape. Nothing at all stands except for the busted shell of a building that looks like an abandoned farmhouse. If you were to come across this thing, you'd likely think it was an old relic at the back of a farmer's wheat field. But in reality, it was an old hospital and friary. Today, it's one of the most important medical sites from medieval Britain. Let me also tell you something about monks. They didn't just sit around in caves all day praying and humming. They usually had a lot of stuff to do, like produce wine and honey, copy manuscripts, care for the sick. At Sutra Isle, they acted as nurses and doctors. The medieval hospital was built at the edge of the main road leading from Scotland to England. If you've seen Game of Thrones, you might remember the King's Road mentioned in the series that leads across the realms. There was something similar in Britain called the King's Highway. It was the main thoroughfare from Scotland to England, built atop the ruins of a much earlier Roman road. The hospital was founded at the edge of this important street in 1164 by King Malcolm IV of Scotland. A few important things have been found here during excavations. Archaeologists have discovered 15 trenches full of medical waste, things like blood and plant scraps that were used to make medicinal potions. Archaeologists were also able to analyze old jars that were used to store these medicines. Analysis of the jars showed the presence of hemlock, opium poppy, lard, and henbane, proving that these monks had an astounding knowledge of herbal medicine. They knew how to dull pain, create a general anesthetic, and cover wounds after amputations. And in the Middle Ages, there were lots of amputations. Archaeologists have found heaps of amputated body parts, which means the monks were also dedicated surgeons. As for that hangover cure I mentioned, the monks created their version using toxic plant seeds and salty liquids. This induced vomiting, which presumably made a person's hangover less brutal. Egyptian artificial light? Electricity, as you and I know it today, was invented in the 1700s by our good friend Benjamin Franklin. You may picture him as the old-timey white guy with the kite, the string, and the key. But what if Benjamin Franklin wasn't exactly the one to discover and harness the power of electricity? What if it was the Egyptians who figured out the truth of electricity 2,000 years earlier? At the ancient Temple of Hathor in Egypt, there is a relief carving that's been baffling experts for decades. It's located within the Temple of Dendera, which was created around the year 50 BC. The image shows what looks like an elongated light bulb connected to a wire, with that wire connected to a power box. Amazingly, inside the light bulb is a filament, though to be fair, the filament is in the shape of a snake. It does look like a light bulb though, there's no getting around it. And mainstream archaeologists say it's not a light bulb at all, it's just a flower. The image that we see as a light bulb is actually a religious drawing representing spiritual energy and gods, but the visual similarity is uncanny. The evidence doesn't stop at a light bulb. There are environmental clues that suggest the Egyptians had a source of electrical lighting. Throughout tombs and temples, archaeologists have identified almost no soot damage on the ceilings. These are structures that are often underground with no access to natural light, so they would have been pitch black without some sort of light source. If the Egyptians had been illuminating these subterranean tombs and dark temples using candles or fire, the ceilings would have been damaged by soot. Keep in mind that the Egyptians also painted and decorated the interiors of their buildings through countless hours of painstaking work. This would have required an intense light source for them to work by. There's no way they were making these beautiful artistic creations underground, using nothing but candles and not leaving a single trace of soot on the ceiling. Maybe it was an electric light, but there is another explanation as well. A simple, boring, but logical explanation is castor oil lamps. These lamps burn cleanly and don't leave soot. It's possible that the Egyptians may have figured out how to make the lamps. It honestly makes the most sense, considering that not anywhere in ancient Egyptian text is there a single mention of electricity. Light bulbs in ancient Egypt are a fun idea, but not entirely based on evidence found in logical reality. Underfloor heating. Even today, underfloor heating isn't exactly the norm. People who live in cold places don't typically have heat coming up from the floorboards. Yet as early as 5000 BC in North Korea, such systems existed. Stone Age humans living on the Korean peninsula heated their floors using a hearth to move hot air underneath their floorboards. By about 900 BC, Homes throughout many parts of Asia had a single hearth for cooking and another that was specifically used as a heating system. It was all to keep their toes warm. The Romans took the idea of hot air from a hearth and dramatically improved it. Both Greeks and Romans used a system of underfloor heating called hypocausts. When building a house, they would leave a large gap between the ground and the bottom floor. They essentially built their houses on pillars so that there was a big crawl space underneath. Then, using a hearth, hot air was forced into the gap beneath the floor. The heat baked the floor, giving their bare feet a nice warm touch, while also heating the entire home. It seems like a simple solution, and it was. But it was also efficient enough that hypocausts continued to be used in England until at least 1904. The Moray Terraces. The Moray Terraces in Peru look like a Roman amphitheater. This ancient ruin is in the shape of a deep bowl, a circular pit with terrace-like stairs stacked up toward the valley above. It's an extremely mysterious ruin because scientists have never figured out what its purpose was. The best guess right now is that the Moray Terraces were used as an open-air laboratory by Inca scientists, likely for agricultural research. Looking at images of this place, it really does look like an amphitheater, and it looks like the terraces could have been used as seats, with the show being held in the bottom bowl. Maybe gladiatorial battles or some epic Inca operas were held here, but researchers don't think that's what was happening. From the bottom bowl to the highest terrace, there is a difference in temperature of 27 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a huge change in temperature for such a small place. It only takes a few minutes to climb up the terraces, yet the temperature can change from freezing to sweater weather. So why in the world would the Inca create such a place? What could it have possibly been used for? Scientists think it was to study wild vegetation and also to understand how crops grow. Each terrace is a microclimate. This would have allowed the Inca to plant seeds along each terrace to see how plants grew at certain temperatures and with very specific access to sunlight. It may have been the world's first botanist laboratory, and it was built over 500 years ago. Ptolemy's manuscript. Researchers just revealed an exciting manuscript from a very long time ago. The manuscript was found scrawled on a recycled piece of parchment in a medieval abbey. The original manuscript isn't medieval, though. Scientists think it was written by legendary Greek mathematician Claudius Ptolemy. He lived about 2,000 years ago at the height of the Roman Empire. The manuscript is amazing simply for existing, but the words scrawled across the ancient parchment are also shocking. It seems to be a message detailing how to build and use a tool that can trace the distances between stars. The manuscript was first found in 1819. Somebody tried to make sense of it, but mostly ruined the pages by pouring a chemical treatment on them. The chemicals stained the pages brown and made the words even less legible. It wouldn't be until 2020 that a team of scientists from several New York universities got to work analyzing the manuscript. And now they've deciphered the instructions on how to build an artifact known as Ptolemy's meteoroscope. This was a very impressive tool. It could calculate heights and distances in relation to cosmic bodies. But what's truly amazing is that if this thing was built today, it would still work exactly the same. More practically, the unusual-looking tool was used to determine one's latitude from the equator. It could also determine the exact date of an incoming solstice or equinox. This strange metal object was even able to locate a planet within a specific zodiac sign. King Tut's camping bed. One of the most incredible pieces of technology from ancient Egypt wasn't a unique tool that helped build the pyramids. It wasn't a highly advanced drill that was used to carve vast underground tombs either. One of the greatest achievements of the ancient Egyptians was creating some camping equipment. King Tut was the Egyptian pharaoh 3,300 years ago. The boy king's tomb was discovered in 1922 by British archaeologist Howard Carter. A lot of amazing things were found buried deep within the desert grave beneath the Valley of the Kings. There were mummies, sarcophagi, treasures beyond your imagination, and also a small, lightweight bed made of hard wood. It was a small folding bed and it was built extremely low to the ground. There were 5 other beds inside the burial chamber as well. While at first researchers were more impressed by the mummy and the gold artifacts, over the years they've been able to take a closer look at everything else in the tomb. The folded wooden bed was ignored for a long time, but was actually an incredible discovery. It was packed into a Z shape by a rather clever mechanism. The mysterious object was recently brought to Naoko Nishimoto at the Musashino University in Tokyo for study. Naoko is a specialist in ancient furnishings and woodworking. According to Naoko, King Tut's Z-folded bed is the only real camping bed that's ever been discovered. It was a portable bed that folded using tiny mechanical hinges. Not a single other pharaoh in all of Egypt has been found buried with such a device. Naoko says that the technology likely existed before King Tut, though the one found in his tomb was revolutionary. The marks on the bed suggest that whoever built it had nothing to look at for reference. It was a completely new creation that was achieved through trial and error specifically for King Tut. The ruler obviously had a great deal of interest in camping and the outdoors. Thanks for watching! Which of these amazing examples of ancient technology did you find the most impressive? Ashurbanipal's Library. Ashurbanipal's library is not an actual library, but rather the name of a collection of over 30,000 clay tablets found in ancient Mesopotamia. The collection consists of text written back when the only way to do so was with a reed stylus and some soft clay. People would make a roughly rectangular piece of clay, then carve words into the clay with a hard piece of reed. This was the first way people wrote things down, except maybe for cave doodles. All 30,000 of the clay tablets were uncovered in the mighty city of Nineveh, located in modern Iraq. This was the capital of the Assyrian Empire in 669 BC, although its foundations date back to roughly 6000 BC. People inhabited the city for almost 6,000 years before it was decimated by a fire. But whereas paper books burn to ashes in a fire, clay tablets simply get baked even harder. That's exactly why Ashurbanipal's library was so perfectly preserved. Even over the centuries, as raiders pillaged the ruins of the city, none of them cared about boring clay text. Thanks to the ingenious invention of clay tablets, we now have a positively massive collection of Assyrian documents. This is like having access to Assyria's own hall of records. It changed history because up until the discovery, the only things we knew about Assyria came from the Bible. Translating the cuneiform text allowed us to understand more about Assyria's history, their ingenuity, and their relationships with neighboring civilizations. The Pushpak Vimana. In ancient Hindu and Buddhist texts, there is something mentioned repeatedly, something called a Pushpak Vimana, or just Vimana for short. Ancient texts describe the mysterious Vimana as an advanced flying machine. It was capable of both hovering in the atmosphere and traveling to other planets. The incredible piece of technology could even move to other dimensions. For many, these ancient texts are evidence that an advanced civilization with space-age technology existed. It may not have been the Hindus and Buddhists of ancient India, but someone else entirely. Based on the ancient texts, the Vimana was a truly miraculous piece of equipment. It's described as a flying palace or a floating chariot. Many have suggested the description comes from the fact that those who witnessed the vehicle didn't understand what it was. It was so big that it looked like a floating palace, or like a chariot that could take to the skies. Those who witnessed such a thing were then shocked to see the vehicle ascend upward into the heavens and vanish. When they described it, they used words like palace and chariot because it was the only way for them to make sense of it. The Vimana was a vehicle used by various gods in Hindu mythology. This makes the existence of the machine even more mysterious. The gods used these flying chariots to move from one place to another and to journey into the stars. Some have suggested the Hindu gods using the flying machines may have been the same gods witnessed by the Sumerians 5,000 years ago, the ones they called the Anunnaki. It's even more evidence that ancient civilizations may have had humanoid visitors from outer space, whom they believed were deities because of their advanced technology. What do you think? Do you believe in ancient aliens? Let me know in the comments. It's shout-out time! I want to say a big thank you to Botman234 Langer and Tia J. Ellis for supporting this channel. We wouldn't be here without you. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like these. British gunpowder mills. Gunpowder was a game changer for human civilization. Human beings went from shooting each other with sharpened sticks to blasting each other's limbs off with gunpowder-fueled weaponry. And it was all thanks to some monks in Britain during the 16th century. Well, not exactly. Gunpowder showed up in China first, then made its way to Europe. The Battle of Crécy in 1346 was when British artillery used gunpowder for the first time, but it wasn't for another 200 years until British monks started experimenting with saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal, and that was when gunpowder could be produced in huge quantities. Before anyone realized what gunpowder could be used for, it was used in alchemical processes. Alchemists were the first to realize the fiery effects of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal. People used the ingredients for hundreds of years in religious ceremonies to scare away evil spirits. Arabs got a hold of the knowledge of gunpowder in the 11th century. The English followed suit, and by the 13th century AD, English monks were busy preparing for war. The English monk Roger Bacon was one of the first to write the formula for gunpowder and express fears over the implications of such a deadly weapon. Gunpowder was largely an accidental discovery, but it was also one of the first mass-produced materials in the world. The production of gunpowder was a huge advancement for England. They were among the first to produce their own private gunpowder mills in 1544. Then, at Waltham Abbey, where monks had set up a mill for making cloth, mass production of gunpowder was put into action. By 1735, England had enough gunpowder to essentially outgun the entire world. The Isagila. The Isagila was once the most important temple complex in ancient Babylon. It was dedicated to the mighty and fearsome god Marduk, built in the shadow of the massive ziggurats called Etemenanki, which dominated Babylon's skyline. As a side note, many biblical scholars believe the Etemenanki was in fact the Tower of Babel. The Isagila temple complex was a whopping 660 feet long, a miracle of ancient engineering. It had 3 interior courtyards, many chambers, and took centuries to build. Multiple Babylonian kings helped fund the project, understanding the Isagila would be for all the generations to come. Even biblical king Nebuchadnezzar II, who reigned between 604 and 526 BC, helped in the construction of the temple complex. Greek historian Herodotus, one of few Greeks who visited Babylon in the 5th century BC, reported Isagila's monumental wealth. In that same century, when Persian King Xerxes, the one from the movie 300, sacked the city, he allegedly removed some kind of monumental statue. Scientists still don't know what statue was stolen by Xerxes, though it was likely a great statue of the god Marduk, maybe even built out of solid gold. Primitive doorbell. In the 1st century AD, a brilliant Greek engineer by the name of Hero, yes, his name really was Hero, came up with some of the most impressive inventions ever. He created a simple steam engine, he invented the cuckoo clock, and he made the first doorbell. He made an automaton to alert people of when they had a visitor 2,000 years ago. It was a trumpet automaton, used to announce the arrival of people inside important buildings like temples. The invention was a huge success. 2,000 years ago, in the Egyptian city of Alexandria, controlled then by the Greeks, there was a problem with temple thievery. People could just wander into temples and do whatever they wanted. This was a major issue if the priests of the temple weren't around to see who came in. To help solve the problem, Hero rigged up a contraption that would announce someone entering the temple with a loud trumpet blast. It worked using a rope, a wooden lever, and a trumpet. When somebody opened the door, the rope yanked on the lever, which lowered an empty vessel into a pot of water, forcing the air in the vessel up and through a mouthpiece connected to the trumpet. The sudden blast of air made a trumpet hoot, which alerted the priest that someone was in the temple. It was extremely simple, yet still one of the first uses of hydraulics and air compression, ancient laser technology. In the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, there is a rock that looks like it was cut by a laser 4,000 years ago. It's called the Al Nasla Rock, and it's been a controversial subject for decades. Nobody seems to understand how such a precise and perfect cut can exist in the center of the massive boulder. It truly appears that the rock was sliced cleanly in two with a high-powered laser beam. The Al Nasla rock dates back to the days of the Tema Oasis, when Saudi Arabia was a primitive place occupied mostly by herders and nomadic tribes. The rock is about 30 feet long, 25 feet wide, and has what looks to be an ancient pictogram of a man riding a horse on it. Geologists say the crack may have been made by weathering, a natural geological phenomenon. Others say there's no way weathering could produce such a smooth crack. The thing that's so bizarre is that from the very bottom to the very top of the rock on both sides where the split is, the stone is smooth. There is no evidence at all that the rock ever split. What it looks like is that someone accidentally waved a laser beam at the rock, perfectly splitting the thing by the length of a fingernail. How do you think the Al Nasla rock was sliced so perfectly? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Incan rope bridges. There is a remarkable display of ancient technology hidden deep in the Andes Mountains of Peru. If you've ever seen Machu Picchu with your own eyes, or even just looked at pictures, you may have wondered how the Inca moved between the mountain peaks and their Andean homeland. Centuries ago, the Inca wove extremely complex rope bridges so that they could move from one mountain peak to another and across large gaps without having to climb like a mountain goat. Many of these rope bridges are still hanging today, although sadly most are hanging by little more than a thread. Let's take the rope bridge that hangs across the Pampas River near Ayacucho. This amazing piece of ancient tech uses twisted branches to make a dangerous crossing over the raging river. It's only about 60 feet long, but has been in use for up to 500 years. In fact, archaeologists say rope bridges have been a regular piece of technology going back to the Wadi culture, 1,400 years ago. The bridges are only now starting to collapse. One of the most recent that fell was the Quechua near the ancient capital of Cusco. Lack of maintenance saw the rope bridge tumble into the gorge, never to be used again. You might be thinking to yourself, hey, it's just a bridge, what's the big deal? But even the Spanish were impressed with the Inca bridges when they arrived in Peru. One of the first Spaniards to talk about them was Pedro de Cieza de León. The sheer scale of these bridges was immense, with the construction techniques highly advanced. Even more impressive is that the ancient rope bridges were part of the Inca Royal Highway, a long-lost series of roads and trails that wound across the Inca's territory. El Torreón. Making vast bridges out of rope was not the only thing the Inca were good at. El Torreón is one of the best examples of just how sophisticated the Inca were when it came to the stars. El Torreón is an ancient observatory that can be found at Machu Picchu, carved by Inca hands around 1450 AD. The structure itself was used to observe the heavens, while beneath it, archaeologists identified a room carved out of solid rock that was used in the worship of the sun god Inti. The ancient observatory is also impressive because it has curved walls. If you look closely at Inca architecture, you'll notice most of their buildings are all made with straight walls. Most Inca buildings are shaped like rectangles or squares. Not everything, but definitely most. El Torreón must have been very special for the Inca to go through the trouble of figuring out how to engineer a curved wall. This took significant masonry skill and engineering knowledge. Te'lapa. Te'lapa is the term used by ancient Polynesians for the scientifically unexplained phenomenon of light underneath the surface of the ocean. Centuries ago, Polynesians used mysterious flashing lights beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean to help aid them on their journeys. It was a navigational aid that allowed them to move between their islands with relative ease. Just imagine an illuminated pathway along the water showing them where to go. And yet in the modern age, nobody has ever been able to figure out what the Te'lapa lights were. Some scientists have hypothesized bioluminescence, something electromagnetic, or simply the luminescence of ocean organisms. The phenomenon was made famous by scientist David Lewis when he started writing about the Polynesians and their exploits in 1972. David's aim was to disprove the theory that Polynesians colonized the Pacific Islands by randomly running into them in their boats. Ancient Polynesian lore speaks of lights guiding the way from island to island. And so, David was desperate to find out what that light was. Could it have been a simple natural phenomenon, or was it a technology we don't know about? Scientists are still clueless. Different Polynesian cultures had different names for the light, such as the islanders of Nikunao, who called it Temata, or Glory of the Seas. Plenty of other sailors, not just Polynesians, have reported witnessing the lights. But despite all the eyewitness testimonies, scientists have never been able to recreate the lights or figure out where they come from. As far as science is concerned, the guiding lights don't exist. What do you think the lights were that the ancient Polynesians were referring to? Let me know your theories in the comments. Royal toilets. Archaeologists recently discovered one of the earliest flush toilets ever used by a human being. 2,400 years ago, high-ranking members of Chinese society had access to technology their peasants did not. At the Jueyang archaeological site in Shanxi province, researchers found a toilet. The toilet was uncovered beneath the ancient capital, but only the bottom half. Scientists aren't sure if it was a squat toilet or a sitting toilet, since they haven't been able to recover the top half. Archaeologist Liu Rui said the artifact is the first and only flush toilet that has ever been found in China. Everyone on site was extremely surprised. But the surprise turned to intrigue when researchers realized just how technologically advanced the Qin Kingdom of China was around 400 BC. Waste management was not the norm for civilizations back then, and neither was being overly hygienic. To find a flushing toilet is a big deal, and suggests at least somebody was well aware of the dangers of human waste. Because only a single toilet was found, designed for the waste to flush down a pipe and empty into an outdoor pit, it was likely reserved for someone very important. It may have been an emperor's toilet or a nobleman's toilet. The toilet also changes the history books because it predates the official invention of the flush toilet by about 1,900 years. John Harrington was believed to be the first man to design a flush toilet. He built one for Queen Elizabeth I in the 16th century. With this discovery, now we know that China did it first, a much longer time ago. The Cloud City. The ancient cloud city of the Chachapoyas is one of the most overlooked marvels of the ancient world. The Chachapoyas were known as the warriors of the clouds, dominating huge parts of Peru before the Inca Empire. Their most incredible feat of engineering was the city of Cuelap, which was built high up in the mountains, in a realm of cloud and perpetual fog. It's such an amazing city, people call it the Machu Picchu of the north. Some even say it's more impressive than Machu Picchu itself, but for some reason, it just doesn't get as much attention. The Chachapoyas built Cuelap around the 6th century AD. It took them an estimated 40 million cubic feet of stone, over 3 times more than what was used to make the Pyramid of Khufu in Giza. It was built with great granite walls that stood up to 60 feet high in some places, with narrow entrances for defense. The interior was populated by ceremonial complexes, rock artwork, and stone houses. This was a formidable fortress in the clouds, overlooking vast valleys and towering mountain peaks in the distance. It must have truly felt like the top of the world at an altitude of over 9,000 feet above sea level. It's difficult to convey just how magnificent the city was, especially since it's entirely in ruins now. The first archaeological mission in 1997 revealed a series of mausoleums at the site, which meant there were burial chambers there to honor dead ancestors. The Chachapoya culture was so mysterious that researchers still don't know much about their religion, their belief system, or their politics. We don't even really know where they came from, only that they ruled from 900 AD until 1470 AD, right between the Wari culture and the Inca Empire. Most of what we know about the Chachapoya culture comes from the Inca and the conquistadors from Spain. Pedro Cieza de León wrote that they were annexed into the Inca Empire and forced to adopt the customs imposed by the government in Cusco. Many Spanish chroniclers describe them as a strange race of people with pale skin and beautiful women who looked nothing like any other indigenous group in South America. This has led to a lot of speculation because the Chachapoya appears to have been an entirely different ethnicity from everyone else on the continent. Sadly, they were completely destroyed by the 18th century. They held out for a while, but just couldn't make it. Ancient Roman water management. Archaeologists in Italy recently uncovered the remains of an extremely sophisticated water management system near Pompeii. The discovery was made in the ancient Roman city of Stabiae, which was also buried under volcanic ash when Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD. What many people don't realize is that Pompeii was just one of the cities that was destroyed during the cataclysmic eruption. In reality, the molten rock, hot ash, superheated gas, and pyroclastic surges enveloped not just Pompeii, but Herculaneum and Stabiae as well. The explosion likely had other dire consequences for the ancient world too, such as plunging Europe into a brief dark age. That would be thanks to ash blocking the sun from the sky, causing crops to wither and die. According to Roman author Pliny the Elder, Stabiae was a luxury coastal settlement. There were elite villas all along the edge of the town, with many belonging to the most important figures in Rome. Julius Caesar had a villa here, and so did Emperor Augustus and Emperor Tiberius. Researchers were excavating an ancient house called Villa Ariana when they uncovered the water system. Digging revealed a decorated lead tank used to distribute water throughout the entire villa complex. This place was huge, so the elites and upper class that lived here required a large amount of clean water. It was first excavated by Carl Weber in 1757. He discovered an atrium at the site, a system of rooms dating back to the Republic. The atrium he found was full of thermal baths, a gym, and plenty of other space to keep the residents of the villa busy. The decorated water tank was connected by pipes that fed water to the various rooms of the complex. Archaeologists think the tank was likely devised using stop keys that enabled whoever lived in the villa to regulate the flow. In other words, they could turn the water on or off, or block the flow so that the water only ran to certain rooms. By heating the tank, they would have been able to enjoy hot showers just like in any modern home. Are you surprised? I'm pretty impressed. Big shout out to Andrew Ferguson for the super thanks. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your support and letting us be a part of your day. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing archaeology and discoveries. Salina Turda. Salina Turda is one of the oldest salt mines in the entire world, maybe even the oldest salt mine in Europe. It hasn't been used since 1932, but up until then it was functional for a continuous 2,000 years. The salt mine is buried underneath the mountainous region of Transylvania, just a few miles from the beautiful medieval city of Cluj. Amazingly, salt started being extracted from the mine before the Roman Empire even existed. The original tunnels dug during ancient times were so immense that they were used as anti-aircraft shelters during World War II. These days, modern technology has transformed the abandoned mine into one of the world's deepest tourist attractions. It goes down about 400 feet deep and spans a total area of 27 square miles. Nowadays, there's a great chasm, dark salt walls, a contemporary art museum, and a Ferris wheel at the site. And that's only the beginning. There is also a bowling alley, an amphitheater that seats nearly 200 people, and a spa. It's a bit more technologically savvy today than it was before the birth of Christ, but the salt is still the same. Riding to the bottom of Salina Turda in elevators, it's hard to imagine that for most of its history there were no machines involved in mining here. During antiquity, locals mined using nothing but primitive picks, shovels, and their bare hands. They extracted salt from the mine that was used at dinner tables all the way into the Middle Ages. But we don't know the exact dates that the mine was in use. It was only mentioned in historical records starting in 1075. Then it wasn't until 1271 that the Hungarian Chancellery mentioned the salt mine in an official document. The Parthenon Illusion. The Parthenon is Athens' crown jewel, their most obvious tourist attraction standing at the top of the city. Sure, you can see the ruins of the statue of Zeus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, but the Parthenon is a little more tangible. Impressively, it's still standing on its carved Doric columns after 2,500 years. With its white Pentelic marble carved using basic tools, the Parthenon is a truly awe-inspiring sight to behold. But it's not just a fabulous example of ancient Greek engineering. It's also an excellent example of an optical illusion. The Parthenon was dedicated to Athena, the virgin goddess and patron deity of Athens. Its architects were Ictinus and Callicrates, and the chief sculptural artist was Phidias. They created the outward beauty of the monument and also figured out a way to trick the eye to make the details of the Parthenon more extreme. There is a reason that when you look at the Parthenon, it feels larger than life without being intimidating. It's because you are staring right at an ancient optical illusion. There are very few straight lines or right angles in the Parthenon. When you stand and stare at it, you see 8 columns that look perfectly straight. However, this is because of subtle distortions that were used in the Parthenon's construction, known as optical refinements. The base of the facade is dome-shaped, meaning it's higher at the center and lower in the corners. The curvature of the building is subtle but important. The column shafts are then slightly tilted to correct any optical distortions, making the whole building seem like a perfect rectangle, when in reality, it's all wonky. The columns in the corner are also wider to make sure they don't look thinner than the columns in the middle. It's a lot of corrections to make sure that everything looks perfect. Otherwise, looking straight in through the front of the Parthenon, you would only see the initial columns, and the whole structure would appear thin and small. It might not sound like much, but the brilliance put into the design of the Parthenon is incredible. Seeing as it was finished in 432 BC, after only 15 years, this is a big achievement. The architects needed a sophisticated knowledge of mathematics and geometric principles in order to achieve this architectural marvel. This is borderline perfection, and it was all done thousands of years ago and without a calculator. The Tower of the Winds. The Tower of the Winds is an ancient timekeeping device near the Agora of Athens, built in the 2nd century BC. It's also called the Clock of Andronicus Cyrustes, and it was constructed about 100 years after the Parthenon. When it was completed, the tower had 9 sundials and boasted an impressively complex water clock. The genius behind the construction of one of the first great functioning clocks was Andronicus, son of Hermes. He was an astronomer from Macedon who was considered to be a major genius. We don't know exactly when construction on the tower started, but scholars think it may have been built over a far older astronomical structure. In ancient Greece, everything was about the stars, including time. The tower was built using the same marble as the Parthenon. It's an octagonal structure that Andronicus equipped with every technological feature he could think of. He put a bronze weather vane at the top to show the direction of the wind, and according to historian R. Hanna, Andronicus even made the roof look just like Mount Lycabettus outside Athens. Personifications of the winds were carved along the top tower on every side, with the tower's vane being built in the likeness of the fish monster Triton from Greek mythology. But the water clock was by far the most impressive feature of the tower. A water clock is one of the oldest timepieces in the world, used by the ancient Egyptians and the Babylonians around the 16th century BC. The design is very simple. Time is measured by a regulated flow of liquid moving out of a vessel. As the vessel drains, the water level will indicate exactly what time of day it is. In the case of the Tower of Winds, the water clock was connected to an endless stream of water coming out of the Acropolis spring. And although such inventions had already been around for a long time, this one was gigantic. That in itself makes it an exceptional piece of technology. It was also built in a very specific place. Its position near the Agora meant that merchants could easily see what time it was, better estimating when their goods would arrive by ship at the port. Ancient electricity. There is a document from the 1st millennium BC called the Agastya Samhita. This ancient Indian text is kept safe at the Prince's Library of Ujjain. What makes it so special is that it contains a detailed description of how to construct a battery. This book is almost 3,000 years old and has instructions for how to build a natural battery cell. It's incredible and completely real, and to this day, it's a massive mystery. According to the document, a sage named Agastya used an earthen pot, a copper plate, wet sawdust, zinc powder, and mercury to make a battery. These are all natural ingredients that wouldn't be that difficult for a sage to find a few thousand years ago. When placed in proper order inside the jar, the ingredients generate about 1.138 volts of electricity. It's not much, but it's still extremely impressive for the time. In the instructions, Agastya wrote that a chain of 100 jars can create an extremely active and effective force. He goes on to explain that with 100 of these batteries, water can be changed into oxygen and hydrogen, and that the hydrogen can be captured in a tight cloth and used for flying. Agastya was literally explaining how a hydrogen blimp works 3,000 years ago. So far as the experts can gather, all this information is true. There really was an ancient sage who figured out how to make electric earthen jars before the concept of a battery truly existed. Through some stroke of genius, he also figured out how to separate oxygen and hydrogen from water. We just don't know how he figured it out so much earlier than everybody else. What do you think ancient people could use batteries for? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're at it, be sure to subscribe. Ancient hydraulics in China. Researchers in China were excavating the ancient city of Liangzhu when they found what could be one of the biggest ancient hydraulic engineering systems in the world. The city dates back about 5,000 years, founded by a group of humans living at the edge of the Yangtze River. From the outside, they might look like primitive people living in crude stone houses, but according to researchers from the University College London, they were so much more. Scientists from the university uncovered the remains of a system that controlled the flow of water in and out of the area. These people had created a humongous hydraulic mechanism using gates, dams, levees, canals, and ditches, and it was all in an attempt to keep their crops from flooding. The area where the ruins were found is low-lying and receives annual monsoons. There is a lot of concentrated rain here in the summer, meaning the city likely experienced major floods. Instead of leaving the fertile region that gave them so much food, though, locals got to work on an unprecedented project. They moved a huge amount of earth in the process, which changed the landscape but protected their crops from floods. In total, they carved out over 18 miles of canals. The work was done using boats to transport workers and materials, not wagons or pack animals. Then, in the years that followed, locals were able to use their hydraulic water system to irrigate crops and store rainwater in massive reservoirs. This community project allowed the settlement to grow, becoming the metropolis of Liangzhu. We don't know if this was the oldest project of its kind, but it was likely the biggest for its day. The settlement dates back to when Stonehenge was built, yet this mysterious Chinese culture was able to do so much more than the Druids in England. They embarked upon a modern construction project, changing the earth and bending Mother Nature to their will. Inuit snow goggles. Thousands of years ago, ancient people living in the Arctic North needed a way to keep themselves from going snowblind. Indigenous cultures in Alaska and Canada lived in a place where snow was present for most of the year. To keep themselves from going blind when the sun glared off the snow and into their eyes, they came up with an ingenious piece of technology. They created snow goggles, something truly brilliant in its simplicity. Snow blindness is a very real threat to those living in Arctic conditions. Ultraviolet light reflects off the snow and ice, creating a burn on the cornea. The light is so intense and the UV rays are so deadly, you can literally get a sunburn on your eyeballs. During the peak summer, when some regions experience 24 hours of consistent daylight, snow blindness is unavoidable without protection. Nobody knows when the first pair of snow goggles were made. It was likely before the Inuit, dating back to the old Bering Sea culture that existed on both sides of the strait. During the initial migration from Asia into North America, there were people dwelling on both sides. Before the Bering Land Bridge vanished, the landscape was largely the same as it is today. North America and Asia were still connected, but then that bridge vanished and the two hemispheres wouldn't be connected again for another 10,000 years. That's likely how old the invention of snow goggles is. We know the Inuit and Yupik made snow goggles from anything they could find, such as a piece of bark, a chunk of driftwood, or a thin piece of whalebone. They even used antlers and walrus ivory to create the goggles. They would take a piece of their chosen material, carve it to fit their face snugly, and then add very thin slits so that they could see. These small slits allowed them to navigate while protecting their eyeballs from the glare. They would often be painted black as well to further reduce the blinding effect. All these years later, snow goggles are still important. Ancient funeral parlor. Archaeologists recently uncovered an ancient funeral parlor in Egypt. It was found near the pyramids, containing the remains of over 50 mummies. Archaeologists found jars with organs, tools used by embalmers, and heaps of other treasures dating back to 600 BC. Mummification was a lot more complex than some people may assume. Mummies weren't made by some guy with a brain scooper and a box of bandages. This was a sophisticated science. Discovering a funeral parlor is fascinating because it shows just how big of a business this really was and how advanced the Egyptians were in all aspects of life. They could bury their mummies hundreds of feet below ground, and they had businesses and professionals to cater to the entire industry. The archaeological dig was led by Ramadan Hussein from Eberhard Karls University of Tübingen in Germany. He and his team uncovered a burial complex hidden beneath the desert sands at the Saqqara necropolis. This necropolis was one of the most important in all of Egyptian history, and it's located no more than an hour from the pyramids. The archaeologists identified the mummified remains of the rich and the poor, and evidence of the funeral packages offered by the funeral home. Ramadan Hussein says the evidence they found shows that the embalmers had exceptional business sense. They reused chambers, resold sarcophagi, and did all they could to maximize profits. This is unprecedented because up until this discovery, the only evidence of such practice has been found in ancient texts. Contrary to popular belief, the ancient world wasn't a place where capitalism ruled without an iron fist. We can see in the remains of this funeral home that the business owners clearly did everything in their power to make more money. But they also had an exceptional operation going on. The excavation revealed ventilation shafts, integrated incense burners, a fumigation system, and even primitive air conditioning. The embalmers also carved drainage channels into the bedrock to funnel blood down into the deeper abyss. All of this was hidden under a whopping 42 tons of packed sand. Egyptian faience. Egyptian faience is a ceramic material that was used for thousands of years by the Egyptians. They figured out how to make this stuff 6,000 years ago during pre-dynastic Egypt, a time that's otherwise known as the Stone Age. Egyptians continued with the same recipe until the Islamic period of the 8th century AD. Faience doesn't have the capability of producing electricity. This isn't a highly advanced substance passed down from alien overlords. It's a simple combination of ground quartz, sodium, calcium, potassium, copper oxide, and magnesium. Comparatively, these are very normal ingredients. The weird thing is that some unknown person figured out they could mix the ingredients and create vibrant bluish-green ceramic in this Stone Age. Faience has the almost supernatural ability to glaze itself because of the combined materials. When the ceramic is put into a kiln, the heat pushes the sodium to the surface through a process called efflorescence. Ancient Egyptian artisans used faience to make pretty much anything, including pots, adornments, and accessories for rituals. Faience was also the precursor to glass, though it took another 3,500 years for anyone to figure glass out. The 5 barbarians. Something strange happened in China about 1,600 years ago. 5 groups of ancient people appeared out of nowhere and disrupted the status quo. These groups of people moved out of northern China and overthrew the Western Jin dynasty. They then established their own kingdoms starting in the 4th century AD. These ancient people were known as the Wuhu, or the 5 barbarians. They consisted of 5 different tribal ethnic groups that nobody had seen as a threat. They descended from the north like barbarians out of the mountains and decimated the more civilized society of Jin. Scientists still don't know exactly who these people were. The Xiongnu and Xianbei were likely nomads from the northern steppes in what is now Mongolia, although the ethnicity of the Xiongnu is completely unknown. The Xianbei might have been Mongolian themselves, while the Ji were a pastoral people who came from parts unknown. Then there were the Qiang, herdsmen who may have come from the highlands in Tibet. The Di were arguably the most mysterious, a band of farmers that either spoke a Turkic language or a Sino-Tibetan one. Wherever these people came from, they turned Chinese civilization on its head. The nomadic groups struck at around the same time, causing chaos and devastation everywhere. They then took over the land, dividing conquered terrain into their own empires. Kumari Kandam. To the south of modern India, somewhere in the Indian Ocean, is supposedly a sunken continent home to a lost civilization. The mythical continent is called Kumari Kandam, and its story dates back to the 19th century. In the early 1800s, scientists speculated the possibility of a continent called Lemuria once existed in the area between Africa and India. Scientists believed the only remaining piece of land from this mysterious continent was Madagascar. They thought it must have been the cradle of human civilization, a paradise from which Homo sapiens first emerged. It was a wild time to follow science, with lots of baseless but incredible theories making the rounds. In India, there is an ancient legend from the days of the Pandya dynasty, which ruled huge parts of southern India from the 4th century BC until about 700 years ago. They spoke of a legendary land that was home to a civilization even older than themselves. Oddly enough, they said the mighty civilization was lost to the sea in a cataclysmic event. The story is extremely similar to the tale of Atlantis, only in a different part of the world. In the 19th century, when scientists started talking about Lemuria, Tamil revivalists in India connected it to the ancient legends of Kumari Kandam. This was believed to be the cradle of civilization and the origin of Tamil culture. Unfortunately, though, such a place has never been discovered. Big thank you to Aknight for the super things. Thanks so much for your support, it means a lot. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family. The Biblical Levites. One of the most mysterious groups of people from ancient history is the Levites, and yet they played an essential role in the development of all 3 major Abrahamic religions. The most famous of all the Levites was Moses' big brother Aaron, the world's first priest. The Levites were responsible for most religious activities done by the ancient Israelites. They served as priests, and they took care of the tabernacle, and they were tasked with maintaining the temples. They were also responsible for both teaching and interpreting the laws of God. Think of the Levites as the Roman Church before Christianity. According to the Bible, the Levites could be traced back to Aaron and Moses. There were 24 different divisions of priests, with each one corresponding to a specific lineage. After the Jews were banished from Babylon, only 4 groups of Levites traveled to Jerusalem. These 4 families were then divided again into 24, confusing everything to the extreme. For a huge amount of Israel's history, the Levites controlled the religious life of the people. But by the time Jesus showed up, things were starting to change. The priesthood, according to Jesus, had become corrupt. And so, Jesus Christ was quite critical of the Levite leaders. This led to a major shift in beliefs, with Judaism going one way and Christianity another. Scientists are still struggling to figure out where the Levites even came from. Biblical scholar Israel Knoll once suggested the Levites were originally an Egyptian cult, but the cult migrated to Israel, merged with the Israelites, and then spread their own one-god religion across the land. Secrets of the Templars. The Knights Templar weren't exactly a civilization by any sense of the word. What they were was a Catholic military order of mighty knights who protected Christian pilgrims for roughly 200 years. They were also known as the Order of Solomon's Temple, or the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ. They banded together in 1119 AD because the Holy Land had been conquered by Muslims who were often hostile to Christian pilgrims. The knights were supposed to protect the pilgrims, but ended up being one of the major fighting forces in the Crusades that followed. They were finally obliterated, though, by France's King Philip IV in the early 14th century. The Pope officially disbanded them in 1312, and after that, the king had them all arrested and killed. All these years later, the secrets of the Templars remain unsolved. It's believed that the king's plan to arrest and kill the Templars leaked, so a large group of knights fled with all their greatest treasures. But nobody knows where they landed or where the treasure went. One possible answer is that the Templars made it all the way to Canada. It's believed a small island off the coast of Nova Scotia is home to a secret buried Templar treasure. I'm sure you know of it already, but the island is called Oak Island, and the family that owns it has been searching for Templar gold for over 100 years. The people of Rapa Nui. In the distant past, a small group arrived on an island after paddling across huge swaths of the Pacific Ocean in wooden outrigger canoes. These individuals navigated the sea by using the stars and the swells of the ocean. Where these people originated from is a mystery, and so too is the reason they embarked upon such a hazardous journey. All history tells us for certain is that they landed on an uninhabited island with rolling green hills, palm trees, and beautiful views of the expansive ocean. On that island, they found a whopping 63 square miles of paradise. They called it Rapa Nui, but you might know it today as Easter Island. The origin of the Easter Island civilization is one of the greatest mysteries we have. On this random piece of land in the middle of nowhere, the newcomers used what few resources they had to carve monolithic statues. They built hundreds of moai, the giant statues that dot the island. These moai average 13 feet tall and weigh roughly 14 tons. Most experts agree they were likely to honor the ancestors, but the effort in building them also helped destroy the natural resources of the island. By the time Dutch explorers arrived in 1722, the place was completely empty. There weren't any trees left, there was no wood for a fire, and there were only a few people remaining. Modern experts think the settlers arrived on the island around 800 AD, but their true identity is still a total mystery. The Rephaim. The Rephaim are first mentioned in the book of Genesis in the Old Testament. The book says that before Abraham's nephew Lot was taken captive along with the residents of Sodom and Gomorrah, the Rephaites were defeated. They were beaten by King Kedorlaomer at a place called Ashtaroth Karnaim. What's really wild about this part of the Bible is that the Rephaim seem to be depicted as giants. The Holy Book makes a very distinct point of saying King Kedorlaomer led his powerful army of humans against an army of giants. It says that after he defeated the giants and began to consolidate nations and lands, other kings joined to fight against him. This was to stop him from gaining too much power, and in the end, the king was defeated. As with most stories from the Old Testament, the troubles with the king are likely based on real historical events. But does that mean there was a civilization of giants called the Rephaim? Not only are they mentioned briefly in the book of Genesis, but they pop up again in Deuteronomy. In fact, Deuteronomy 3 says the last king of the Rephaim was a giant named Og of Bashan, but it really doesn't go into any more detail. Biblical scholars are torn on the subject. It's clear the Rephaim were a group of ancient people just like the Israelites or the Philistines, but according to the Bible, they were also extremely large. But whether they were true giants is something archaeologists have never been able to confirm. Keep in mind, though, that Deuteronomy does say that King Og's bed was 14 feet long and 6 feet wide and was kept on display for years after his death. Do you think he was really that big? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The Giants of Laos. There is one ancient place on this planet that's been baffling historians and archaeologists for about a century. A place not many people know about. It's called the Plain of Jars, and it's in the landlocked Southeast Asian country of Laos. The site is exactly what it sounds like, a plain covered in shattered jars. These jars are in fact prehistoric stone vessels, many of which are 10 feet tall and weigh several tons. Even though French archaeologists began puzzling over the mystery in the early 1900s, scientists still haven't made any headway. Experts have found bronze bells, the debris left behind by human bones, and other random objects. But unfortunately, there has been no leads to explain who made the jars or why. Some have suggested the jars of Laos were drinking vessels used by a remote civilization of giants 2,000 years ago. Local legend says the tribe of giants used these stone jars as wine chalices following a great victory. They then smashed the chalices across the hills and in the plains where they have remained ever since. Amazingly, there is an almost identical site 600 miles away in India. To add even more fuel to the mystery, between 1964 and 1973, the US dropped more bombs on the Plain of Jars than anywhere else throughout the entirety of World War II. Some believe this was a calculated decision to erase the ancient history at the site. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments. And while you're at it, be sure to subscribe. The Gene Geno. One of the greatest civilizations to ever rise in Africa was the Gene Geno. They prospered in what is now Mali, West Africa. They dominated the region from a city that was also called Gene Geno, though the truth is that nobody really knows what they called the city or what they called themselves. These were names given to them by modern archaeologists. Their great capital is believed to be one of the oldest cities in all of Africa, dated at 2,800 years old. Some historians have even speculated the Gene Geno were somehow linked to the equally powerful Nok culture of Nigeria. Both of these forgotten groups were experts in sculpting impressive works of art. The Gene Geno were particularly handy with terracotta figurines. The capital became a major center for trade and culture. There was agriculture, ironworking, and a solid economy based around fishing. There was also a steady supply of salt, gold, and slaves that were traded through the city. Nowhere in West Africa could a person find better quality iron tools and weaponry than at Gene Geno. But not everything lasts forever. In the 13th century, the city suddenly collapsed in on itself. The culture declined and the Gene Geno vanished from history. Nobody knows what happened, although there are three main theories. It could have had something to do with the climate changing or with shifting trade routes, or perhaps it involved internal political issues. Whatever the case, the civilization vanished and the ruins of their society weren't found until the early part of the 20th century. The secrets of the White Shaman Mural. In the canyon lands of southwest Texas is White Shaman Rock, an ancient stone shelter carved into the side of a cliff. Inside the narrow alcove is a collection of pictographs stretching across 26 feet of soft stone. The pigment has faded, but in the setting sun you can still see the faint yellow and red of the original images, which featured headless humans, strange creatures, and mystical symbols. These pictographs were made by a mysterious civilization that lived here from between 2500 BC and 500 AD. Even today, though, scientists aren't really sure who these people were or what their ancient artwork meant. Many archaeologists have speculated the pictographs were made by shamans as a way to recreate hallucinogenic experiences. People would come to White Shaman Rock high on stimulants, and once there, they would look at the images and have visions of their very own. But Carolyn Boyd from Texas State University has a different opinion. She thinks the pictographs are a record of the beliefs of the mystery civilization that lived here. Sadly, we may never know the truth. The culture of the canyon lands of Texas vanished 1,500 years ago, And although their modern descendants may still be alive in Mexico, they might not even know their own ancient history. The gallina. Not all the ancient cultures of the southern United States are a complete mystery. There is another culture that lived in the canyons and deserts of New Mexico that we know a lot about. They were called the gallina, and they prospered here starting about 1,025 years ago. Their culture flourished near the Jemez Mountains until 1300 AD, when, just like so many other civilizations of that time, they vanished seemingly into thin air. Scientists believe the gallina could be linked to the ancestral Puebloans or the Anasazi, who dominated the Four Corners region up until the 14th century. These were the people who built cliff dwellings and ancient cities out of mud and stone before disappearing. The gallina may have been an offshoot civilization, one that moved just far enough away to be left alone. Archaeologists have found evidence of basket weaving, pottery, and ornaments made of shells. They also may have traded local obsidian to other groups for regional goods. What's really exciting about the gallina is that they left behind huge towers that they'd built along rugged ridges. These towers were made with thick walls and may have operated as a kind of defensive line. Archaeologists have theorized the towers were signal stations to alert everyone in the case of an invasion. Then again, others believe that the towers were used for food storage and nothing else. As you can tell, there's a lot of guessing and speculation when it comes to the gallina and ancient civilizations in general. The Indricotherium. The Indricotherium was the biggest creature you've never heard of. The remains of this enormous creature were found early in the 20th century, and it's been a controversial topic among paleontologists ever since. No one has even agreed on what to call it, with some still referring to it as the Paraceratherium. Whatever you choose to call it, this creature was a giant mammal, the largest terrestrial mammal that ever walked the face of the Earth. It was so big that its bones could have easily been mistaken for some of the biggest dinosaur bones in the world. Even though the Indricotherium was a mammal with no relation to dinosaurs, it was almost the same size as some of the biggest sauropod dinosaurs, which were the biggest dinos that ever existed. The Indricotherium was an ancestor of the modern rhinoceros. It looked like a mix between a rhino, an elephant, and a brontosaurus. It had a very long neck, just like you'd expect with a diplodocus or a brachiosaurus. But then its legs were thin and it only had 3 toes on its feet. These stumps were like the feet of elephants, only way bigger. It's believed it was an herbivore, though it didn't have a trunk. Instead, it had a prehensile upper lip that allowed it to grab leaves from trees. The size of this monster is hard to imagine. It was 40 feet long and 20 tons, and yet that's only a guess. Because of the scant fossil record, archaeologists can't be sure of their size. Some of these beasts may have been larger, others may have been a bit smaller. They only lived for a brief time during the Oligocene period, between 33 and 23 million years ago. They also only lived in Asia, roaming the plains on their massive legs and munching on plants. The Spinosaurus. The Spinosaurus was the biggest carnivorous dinosaur. End of discussion. It was positively massive, measuring 50 feet long and weighing roughly 7.5 tons. It didn't weigh as much as some others, but its length and its weight together make it the largest that paleontologists know about. The first specimens of this prehistoric demon were found in western Egypt in 1910. Over a century later, researchers still can't agree on the specifics of the Spinosaurus. Nobody is sure if it was semi-aquatic or fully terrestrial. Because we know the Spinosaurus lived in coastal areas, and because of its long snout, we know its diet consisted mostly of seafood. But scientists don't know if it waded into the water and hunted prehistoric crocodiles in the shallows, or if it was able to submerge its entire body and swim like a reptile. The Spinosaurus lived 99 million years ago in North Africa. It was almost like a hybrid between the Tyrannosaurus rex and a real-life dragon. It was a mammoth dinosaur, even larger than the legendary Giganotosaurus, with its narrow skull measuring 6 feet in length. Its skull happened to be shaped similar to the skull of a giant crocodile. The Spinosaurus is the only dinosaur we know about that lived on land, but primarily feasted on seafood. It's impossible to say who would have won in a battle, the Spinosaurus or the T-Rex. However, chances are it would have been the Spino. The Spinosaurus had one major advantage. It had fully functioning arms, unlike the T-Rex's tiny stubs. It was also bigger and meaner, which in the animal kingdom means a lot. Who do you think would win in a fight, the Spinosaurus or the T-Rex? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Patagotitan majorum. The biggest dinosaurs in the world are all different species of titanosaur. The titanosaur is a family of armored sauropods that spread to every single continent on the planet during the Cretaceous period. Some titanosaurs were measly pipsqueaks like the Saltasaurus, who only weighed 10 tons. But by the time they reached their evolutionary peak 100 million years ago, these things were the closest thing to real giants. Scientists can't agree on which titanosaur was the biggest, since fossil evidence is rare, but there are some major contenders. The first is Maximo. Patagotitan majorum could be the largest dinosaur that scientists have ever found. It was a long-necked plant eater that dominated the landscape of Patagonia in Argentina. Its nickname in Spanish, Maximo, translates to maximum. In other words, it's the maximum dinosaur. Its long neck and massive tail give it a full length of 122 feet. That makes it the biggest animal that ever lived, even bigger than the blue whale. It weighed 70 tons, which is roughly the same weight as 10 African elephants. The fossils of this titan were officially described in 2017 by scientists who named the animal. The bones were uncovered in the Patagonian desert region in Argentina when a rancher just stumbled over it. The bone was just sticking out from the ground and the rancher tripped over it. Imagine going for a walk in your backyard and tripping over the femur of the largest thing that ever existed. What would you do? Let me know in the comments. Big shout out to Álvaro Damian Carrasco Mesa and Mike Stevenson. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family. We've got lots more videos coming up. The blue whale. The biggest animal alive on our planet right now is the blue whale. It's also the biggest animal that ever lived. The blue whale, even though it averages about 90 feet, has been estimated to reach lengths between 120 and 140 feet. That's longer than any titanosaur of the dinosaur age. The biggest titanosaur may have reached 100 tons, and even that's a stretch. The blue whale can weigh up to 155 tons. There is absolutely nothing that has ever evolved on our planet that can compare to the size of the blue whale. The blue whale is big enough to fit 40 elephants, 30 T-Rexes, or 2,670 average humans. What a lot of people don't realize is that the blue whale wasn't always so large. 48 million years ago, it evolved from a four-legged mammal that slipped into the ocean and started swimming. Its ancestor was the Pakicetus, a small mammal only about 4 or 5 feet long. It foraged in streams as it became adapted to life in the water. About 10 million years later, the Pakicetus had evolved into the fully aquatic Dorodon, which was about 12 feet long. This evolution continued until today, with the blue whale now the biggest living creature in existence. The African bush elephant. The blue whale is the biggest thing in the ocean, and the African bush elephant is the biggest animal on land. It isn't nearly as impressive as some of the wacky creatures that came before it millions of years ago, but it is the last of the giants still living, with adult bush elephants reaching 24 feet in length and standing 13 feet tall. Each one weighs roughly 11 tons, and they spend the majority of their time foraging. Just like so many giants of the past, elephants are herbivores. They eat grass, leaves, fruit, and whatever foliage they can find. They consume about 350 pounds of plant matter every day. The African bush elephant is special for a lot more reasons than just its intense size. Other than human beings, African elephants live longer than any other mammal. They have a lifespan in the wild of 70 years. Elephant herds are also led by the matriarch, the eldest female. These wise animals form close-knit communities ruled by elephant queens. Adult males almost never join herds and spend their lives roaming around in the wild, fairly cranky since nobody wants to hang out with them. Have you ever seen an African bush elephant in person? Let me know in the comments. Hatzegopteryx. Millions of years before Transylvania was home to Count Dracula, it was home to what may have been the biggest flying reptile that ever existed. It was a giant pterosaur called Hatzegopteryx, and it had a taste for dinosaur meat. When this thing was still alive during the Cretaceous, right before the extinction of the dinosaurs, it was like a giraffe with wings. The flying death machine was so big that when paleontologists found its remains in the early 1990s, they thought it was some kind of weird-looking tyrannosaur. But no, it was a real aerial wonder with a wingspan of 40 feet across. That is truly incredible and kind of hard to believe. The Hatzegopteryx's wings were so big, you could have built a small cabin on its back. Its skull alone was 10 feet long. And although scientists have yet to find an example of its jaw, they think it may have had the longest jaw of any terrestrial tetrapod. There is still a lot of debate over how the dragon of Transylvania kept itself fed, because it really was a dragon in terms of size, just without the fire breathing. Scientists think it may have been a scavenger, although that might not be the case. It may have fed kind of like a pelican by scooping food into its mouth. But the most popular theory is that it was a terrestrial stalker, meaning it hunted on land instead of in the sky. It likely ran around, pecking things to death and chomping their bones, then flying up to its nest high in the mountains. Megalodon versus Mosasaurus. The Mosasaurus was one of the biggest predators the ocean has ever seen. It grew to a shocking length of 59 feet, making it fairly comparable to the average megalodon. The megalodon was another fierce aquatic predator that ruled the oceans until fairly recently. The megalodon only went extinct about 3 million years ago. The Mosasaurus 50 million years before that. But which one of these prehistoric monstrosities was the most terrifying? Or maybe an even more exciting question, which one would win in a fight? The Mosasaurus had 50 conical teeth that were long and tapered, designed to go through flesh like a bullet. Their jaws were also double-hinged, allowing them to swallow their prey whole, just like snakes. The Mosasaurus didn't take bites out of its meals, it gobbled them whole. It mainly ate things like fish, turtles, smaller versions of itself, and large ammonites. It also had a taste for squid. At the end of the day, the Mosasaurus was a nearly 60-foot-long reptile with paddle-shaped limbs similar to the Loch Ness Monster. The Megalodon was a different beast altogether. It was like a great white shark injected full of radioactive waste and turned into a monster. The Megalodon had 5 rows of 276 teeth like razors. Rather than swallowing its prey, the Megalodon chewed its victims and shook them like ragdolls. It was an ambush hunter and would have grabbed its prey inside its massive jaws, broken bones and torn skin, and shook them to death. The maximum length of the Megalodon was about 65 feet. It was the biggest shark that ever lived. Although the Megalodon and the Mosasaurus were close in size, both apex predators and both seriously mean, there could only be one winner. In a hypothetical fight, the sheer bulk of the Megalodon and its powerful jaws would make quick work of the giant reptile. Do you agree? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Sarcosuchus imperator. Speaking of giant reptiles, let's take a look at what was likely the biggest crocodile that ever existed. It's the super croc, scientifically known as the Sarcosuchus imperator. It was significantly larger than any modern crocodile in existence. For a quick size comparison, modern saltwater crocodiles grow to be somewhere around 18 feet. They would have looked like toddlers next to the monumental super croc, which could reach lengths of over 36 feet. It wasn't the only giant crocodile either. Dr. Mark Young, a paleontologist at the University of Edinburgh, says there were lots of big crocodilians. The Deinosuchus from the late Cretaceous was close in size to the Sarcosuchus. There were also giant caimans living in the Amazon that were behemoths compared to the caimans there now. However, these all went extinct about 5 million years ago. Mark also says that during the time of the Sarcosuchus, about 113 million years ago, there were marine crocodiles. These were crocodiles who didn't hang out in rivers and on swampy coastlines, but dwelled deep in the ocean. Mark says these ocean crocodiles were at least the same size as the supercroc, maybe even bigger. We just don't have enough evidence to say for certain. Argentinosaurus. Before the discovery of Maximo, Argentina was home to another monumental beast dubbed the biggest dinosaur ever. In 1987, paleontologists uncovered the buried remains of the Argentinosaurus. It was a member of the Titanosaur family and shocked scientists around the world with its incredible size. Although estimates do vary, most reconstructions place the dinosaur at 85 feet long and 75 tons. That maximum guess is a total length of 100 feet and 100 tons. At the time, it was the biggest dinosaur ever discovered. The newly found Maximo beats the Argentinosaurus by at least 22 feet, maybe more. Still, the Argentinosaurus deserves a spot on the list simply for being the biggest for so long. This gigantic dinosaur had a top speed of 5 miles an hour, which is pretty incredible. That's faster than a 747 jet plane while taxiing. Just try to imagine the collateral damage inflicted by a beast with these proportions steamrolling through the forest. A sudden stampede could have easily caused a small extinction event. But did the Argentinosaurus have any predators? Oddly enough, yes. Scientists have found the bones of the Giganotosaurus near scattered remains of the Argentinosaurus. It could just be that one of the biggest predators of all time hunted one of the biggest plant eaters of all time, maybe even in packs like huge reptilian wolves. Giganotosaurus. The Giganotosaurus was at least 45 feet long from the tip of its nose to the end of its tail. In terms of height, it was almost 20 feet tall. These are all rough guesses put forth by scientists, but the important thing to know is that the Giganotosaurus was huge. It weighed anywhere between 5 and 10 tons and was so big it was the only thing capable of bullying the biggest sauropods of the Cretaceous. From 93 to 89 million years ago, the Giganotosaurus rampaged across South America. It was in the top 3 of the biggest known terrestrial carnivores. It was about 6 feet longer than the T-Rex, and most likely heavier too, but it was smaller than the mighty Spinosaurus. Between these 3 creatures, the Cretaceous would have been a terrifying time to be alive, at least as a human. If you were a Giganotosaurus, life probably wasn't that bad. Nobody tried to eat you, and you were big enough to eat anyone who tried. But there was a downside to being a giant reptile with teeth like oversized ice picks. Scientists have found the Giganotosaurus had a brain even smaller than the T-Rex. The Tyrannosaurus rex is famous for having a brain the size of a walnut, despite its immense size. But the Giganotosaurus's brain was even smaller, and for some reason, shaped like a banana. Thanks for watching! Which giant creature is your all-time favorite? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Bye!